My name is Lisa Morgan. I'm 33, a financial director for a tech startup in Chicago. Most days, I feel in control of my life, like I've built something solid after years of careful planning and hard work. But that all changed on a Tuesday in late March when I found a thick envelope wedged in my mailbox. At first, I thought it was another pre approved credit offer or a refinancing pitch. I almost threw it away without opening it. But something about the weight of it, the embossed letterhead on the front, made me pause. I tore it open at my kitchen counter, still in my coat, expecting to find spam. What I found instead made my hands go cold. It was a full mortgage packet. My name was printed at the top of every page, attached to a $460,000 loan for a home in Evanston, Illinois. I had never seen the address before. There was a payment schedule, terms my employer listed, and my signature. I froze. Not because I had forgotten something, not because this felt vaguely familiar, but because it felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I stared at that signature, trying to remember if I'd signed anything by mistake, if somehow this was a bizarre work error. But no, that wasn't my handwriting. The swirl in the G was too perfect, the lines too deliberate. It was a good imitation, but it wasn't mine. I felt the bottom of my stomach fall out as one thought landed hard in my mind. Someone had used my identity to buy a house. I remember whispering to myself over and over, "This has to be a mistake. There's no way. There's just no way." I grabbed my phone and called the mortgage company, but it was after business hours. I left a voicemail, my voice shaking, and then just stood there in the middle of my kitchen for what felt like an hour. That night, I barely slept. I replayed every possible scenario in my head. Did I leave documents at my parents' house over the holidays? Could this be some elaborate scam? Was my identity stolen by a stranger or someone I knew? My brain spiraled from one possibility to another until everything blurred. The next morning, before I could even follow up with the mortgage company, my mother called me. She asked casually if I'd received the paperwork. My mind snapped into place. That voice, that tone, like it was normal, like this was part of some family plan I had apparently missed. When I pressed her, she told me we should talk over dinner. My dad and my sister would be there too. In that moment, I knew. I didn't know exactly what they had done or why, but I knew they were involved. And I knew this wasn't going to be just another family misunderstanding. Something had shifted something big. And whatever it was going to change everything. Looking back, I think the favoritism started so early that I didn't even have a name for it. I just felt it like a low hum beneath everything in our house. I was the older sister, the responsible one. Emily was the baby, the one who needed more, who couldn't be expected to handle as much. That was the story told over and over until it became truth. My parents weren't cruel. They didn't scream or hit or call us names. It was subtler than that, more insidious, because it hid behind words like fairness and love. When I got straight A's, my dad would ask why I didn't take more AP classes. When Emily barely passed her classes, my mom would throw a little celebration for how hard she tried. They called it encouragement. To me, it felt like erasure. I remember my 16th birthday. I'd saved for months, hoping my parents would chip in so I could finally get a used car like some of my friends. Instead, I got a refurbished bicycle with a bow. 2 years later, Emily turned 16, and there was a brand new Toyota Corolla in the driveway, complete with balloons and a big family brunch. I told myself it didn't matter. I was the strong one. I didn't need things handed to me. When it came time for college, I worked part-time at a bookstore all through high school. I applied for scholarships, took out loans, and filled out the FAFSA on my own. My parents told me they were proud, but that they couldn't afford to help. The economy, they said. We're trying to do better for Emily. Then Emily graduated and went to a private art school in New York. They paid her full tuition, her rent, and even gave her a monthly stipend. She dropped out a year later to explore her options. They said she needed space to grow. I was working 20 hours a week in college and still skipping meals to afford textbooks. Emily was traveling through Europe on a gap year my parents funded after her second dropout. I tried not to be bitter. I told myself she was struggling, that maybe they were right to be softer with her. But some nights when I was alone in the campus library filing financial aid paperwork, the unfairness sat in my chest like a stone. Even our achievements were treated differently. When I landed my first job at a bank, my dad said it was solid, nothing fancy. When Emily got an unpaid internship at a lifestyle magazine, they toasted with champagne. I learned to keep my wins quiet, to play down my promotions, to smile and nod when the conversation turned to how Emily was finding her passion. The thing that hurt the most wasn't the money or the gifts. It was the message behind it. That no matter how hard I worked, I'd always be the one who could handle disappointment. That their pride in me was conditional, something practical and reserved. While with Emily, their love was unconditional, messy, generous, and loud. I never wanted to feel like I was competing with my sister. I loved her. I still do in some deep, complicated way. But the imbalance shaped me. It made me cautious. It made me someone who clung tightly to independence because I learned early that no one would step in to catch me if I fell. What I didn't realize was that even when you've built your own safety net, the people you trust most can still cut the ropes. I kept rereading the documents, hoping I had misunderstood something. Maybe it was a typo. Maybe they sent it to the wrong Lisa Morgan. But there it was. My name, my social security number, my employer, and somehow my signature. The pages felt heavy in my hands, like holding proof that something deeply wrong had happened, and somehow I was the one left to deal with it. The house was in Evanston, a suburb I'd driven through once or twice, but never had reason to visit. The purchase price was $460,000. The monthly payments were nearly $2,900. I'd never applied for this, never toured that home. I hadn't even been considering buying property yet. My brain scrambled for explanations. Could this be an elaborate phishing scam? Identity theft by a stranger? Or was it someone closer? I grabbed my laptop and pulled up my bank accounts, my credit report, anything I could check for recent changes. Everything looked the same. No big withdrawals, no new accounts. But there, under new credit activity, was the mortgage. Official. Approved. Active. It was real. And somehow someone had made it look like I had done this. My pulse pounded in my ears. I called the mortgage company again, left another message, then sat at my kitchen table staring at the packet. The longer I looked, the more my skin crawled. It wasn't just that someone had used my information. It was that someone had taken something sacred, something tied to my autonomy, and twisted it. Signing mortgage papers was no small thing. It meant commitment. It meant risk. It meant a future. I picked up the contract again and stared at the signature. It looked like mine. It wasn't. But whoever forged it knew my writing well enough to copy the nuances. The looped M, the lean, and the A. My hands started shaking. I wasn't just dealing with fraud. I was dealing with betrayal. The kind of betrayal that doesn't come from strangers. The kind that knows you lives in your memories and still chooses to take. I showed up at my parents' house that evening with a knot in my stomach. Emily's car was already in the driveway, parked like it belonged there. Inside, everything looked normal. My mom handed me a glass of wine like it was just another Sunday dinner. My dad gestured toward the armchair across from them, his tone calm, rehearsed. It felt like I was walking into an ambush I hadn't seen coming. They started talking about the housing market, about how renting was a waste of money. My mom chimed in about how hard it's been for Emily to find stability. I sat there barely breathing, waiting for the catch. Then it came. My dad looked at me and said they'd found the perfect house for Emily. And since her credit wasn't strong enough, they had used mine. Just like that. Like it was no big deal. I blinked at them, stunned. My voice cracked when I asked if they were saying what I thought they were saying. My mom nodded almost proudly. They used my financial information. They signed for me. My dad said it was for the family, that I was doing so well and Emily needed a boost. My mom called it a contribution, a chance to support my sister's future. I stood up, my pulse racing. My whole body felt hot and numb at the same time. I told them it was fraud, that they had forged my signature. My dad's voice got sharp. He said I was being dramatic. My mom said family doesn't need permission for everything. Emily finally spoke. She said I could afford it, so why was I being so cold? I lost it. I told them they had no right. That no amount of family talk could excuse stealing my identity. My dad ordered me to calm down. My mom grabbed my arm and hissed that if I walked out, I was turning my back on the family. I looked her in the eyes and said if family means being lied to, used, and betrayed, maybe I was done being part of it. Then I left. And I didn't look back. The day after that dinner, I called Rachel. We'd been close in college, and now she worked as a legal associate at a firm in the Loop. I hadn't spoken to her in over a year, but the second I explained what happened, she told me to come in that afternoon. I showed her the mortgage documents, the fake signature, and everything I knew. Her expression darkened as she flipped through the pages. She said I needed to treat this seriously. This wasn't just a family dispute. It was identity theft and mortgage fraud. Hearing those words spoken out loud made everything feel heavier. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was scared. I had no idea what the legal consequences could be or how this would affect my credit, my job, my future. Rachel walked me through the next steps. We needed to contact the mortgage company, file a fraud report, and start documenting everything. Emails, texts, voicemails. Anything that showed my parents had done this without my knowledge or consent. At first, I thought the hardest part was behind me. I had a plan. I had support. But I hadn't anticipated the fallout. Within days, my phone was flooded with messages from family, my aunt's cousins, and even people I hadn't spoken to in years. Most were angry. They accused me of tearing the family apart, of turning on my own parents. Some just said they were disappointed. I should be grateful for everything my parents have done for me. Then came the social media posts. Emily put up a video of herself crying, saying her sister was trying to make her homeless. She said I had turned into someone cold and heartless. She shared old photos of us as kids and talked about how she had always looked up to me. The comments poured in. People I didn't even know called me selfish, accused me of being greedy, of caring more about money than family. It didn't stop there. My mom showed up at my office one afternoon demanding to see me. Security had to escort her out. My dad sent an email to my boss claiming I was mentally unstable and possibly dangerous. Luckily, my boss didn't believe it, but it was humiliating. I had to explain the entire situation just to keep my job safe. I started checking the lobby every morning before walking in, paranoid they'd show up again. By the end of that week, I felt like the ground beneath me had crumbled. The people who were supposed to protect me had become the ones attacking me. My own name was being dragged through the mud, not by strangers, but by the people who raised me. I was trying to fix something that I didn't break, and somehow I was the villain in their version of the story. I had never felt more alone. It happened on a Thursday morning. I was still in bed when I heard the knock. Through the peephole, I saw a man in a black jacket holding a large envelope. I opened the and he handed it to me without a word. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside were legal documents. My parents were suing me. The complaint was thick. 30 pages of legal jargon and twisted logic. They accused me of reneging on a verbal agreement to buy the house for Emily. They claimed I had agreed to take on the mortgage and then abandoned my responsibilities. They called it a betrayal of family values. They painted me as ungrateful, manipulative, and heartless. I sat on my couch reading it all, my mouth dry, my fingers trembling. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. They had taken everything I had ever done for myself and turned it against me. Every promotion, every responsible choice, every ounce of financial independence. In their eyes, it was all evidence that I owed them. That success gave them the right to make decisions for me. They didn't even deny forging my signature. They claimed it was done with love, that they had implied authority based on years of unspoken understanding. I felt sick. I couldn't stop picturing them at the kitchen table, drafting that lawsuit, rewriting our history, line by line. My own parents, who had watched me struggle, had stood by while I paid off student loans and built my credit from scratch, now using the law to punish me for saying no. It was like being stabbed in the back and then told to apologize for bleeding. For a moment, I questioned everything. Maybe I was being too rigid. Maybe I should just pay the mortgage, take the hit, and move on. I told myself it wasn't worth the stress, the isolation, the shame. But then I remembered what Rachel had said. If I let this go, it sets a precedent. It tells them it's okay to cross any boundary if they wrap it in family. So I took a breath and called her. I told her I had received the documents. Her voice didn't waver. She said we would fight. What they were doing wasn't just cruel, it was legally baseless. But I still cried that night. Not because I was afraid of the court, but because I knew deep down that even if I won, I had already lost something I would never get back. I had lost the illusion that my family would ever see me for who I really was. Not a bank, not a safety net, just their daughter. The weeks leading up to the hearing were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and late-night meetings with my attorney, Marcus. He was sharp, calm, and had handled enough family financial disputes to know exactly where this was headed. Together, we gathered every piece of evidence we could find. Emails, text messages, even an old voice memo from my mother casually mentioning the house before I ever knew about it. Marcus filed a formal response to the lawsuit and added counterclaims. We accused my parents of fraud, identity theft, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The most damning pieces were 2 text messages between them that I found on an old iCloud backup. One of my fathers said, "She won't say yes if we ask directly." The other from my mother replied, Just move forward. Once it's done, she won't risk her image by backing out. Those messages changed everything. They proved intent. The morning of the hearing, I dressed in my most professional Navy suit and showed up at the courthouse 30 minutes early. My stomach was in knots, but I felt a strange steadiness in my chest. We sat on the defendant's side of the room, facing my parents and their attorney. They looked composed, like they believed the story they had written. My sister sat beside them, avoiding my eyes. Judge Ramirez, a tall, no-nonsense woman in her 60s, took her seat with the weight of someone who didn't tolerate drama. Marcus presented our case clearly, laying out the facts, the timeline, and the evidence. He didn't add flair. He didn't need to. The truth did the heavy lifting. When he read the text messages aloud, I saw the judge's eyes narrow. My parents' lawyer tried to reframe it all as a family misunderstanding. He spoke about obligations, unwritten agreements, and the sacrifices parents make. But the judge interrupted him. She asked point blank if they were disputing the forgery. He said no. Then she asked if they believed implied consent justified falsifying documents. He hesitated. In that silence, everything changed. For the first time, I felt like someone in power saw through the act. I wasn't just defending myself. I was finally being heard. And that, more than anything, gave me the strength to keep going. The ruling came a week later. I was sitting at my desk when Marcus called. His voice was calm but firm. The judge had dismissed the case with prejudice. Not only that she granted our motion for sanctions, my parents would have to pay a portion of my legal fees, and the court referred the matter to the state attorney's office for potential criminal charges. It was a full win on paper. When I hung up, I didn't cry or cheer. I just sat there staring out the window at the parking lot below. I should have felt relief, maybe even triumph. Instead, what washed over me was exhaustion. A deep, aching kind of fatigue that made my bones feel heavy. I had fought so hard to protect myself, and I had. But it came at a cost I couldn't measure in money. The news spread quickly. A local blog picked up the story. A few former coworkers messaged me with vague words of support. Some relatives who had ghosted me during the lawsuit quietly liked a post I made about the verdict. Emily went silent on social media. My parents disappeared from mine entirely. No messages, no calls, just silence. It wasn't unexpected, but it still hurt in ways I hadn't prepared for. Days later, I got a call from the mortgage company confirming that my name had been removed from the deed. My credit would be repaired and I would no longer be responsible for the loan. They were pursuing their own case now. That part felt clean. Final. But emotionally, I was still sorting through debris. Winning didn't fix what had broken between us. It didn't rewind time or erase the moment my mom looked me in the eye and called my pain dramatic. I missed the version of my family I used to believe in, the one I thought existed behind the dysfunction. But maybe that version was always just a story I told myself to cope. What I had now was the truth. Hard, cold, but solid. I had chosen myself. For the first time, fully and without apology. And even if that choice left me standing alone, I knew it was the only one that gave me any chance of peace. After the ruling, I knew I couldn't stay in the same apartment. Everything there reminded me of that year. The papers are on the floor. The voicemail from my father. The nights I sat awake pacing the hallway with a stomach full of dread. I found a small condo on the west side not far from work. It was quiet, filled with natural light, and for the first time entirely mine. Signing those mortgage papers felt different. This time it was my choice. My name. My future. I started seeing a therapist named Lena. She specialized in family trauma and financial abuse. In our first session, I cried almost the entire time. Not out of sadness, but out of relief. Someone finally understood that what happened to me wasn't just a dispute over money. It was a violation of trust, of autonomy, of identity. Lena helped me see the patterns I had ignored for years. The way my parents minimized my needs. The way I internalized the belief that saying no made me ungrateful. We worked on boundaries, on language, on reclaiming the voice I'd learned to silence. I also joined an online support group. At first, I just read. Stories from people like me who had been guilted into giving tricked into debt erased in the name of loyalty. Slowly, I started posting. Nothing big, just pieces. The moment I found the fake signature. The first time I said no and meant it. Then one night, someone messaged me privately. Her name was Claire, and she had just discovered that her brother had opened 2 credit cards in her name. She was terrified, ashamed, and didn't know where to start. I sent her my list of first steps, then stayed up with her until 2 a.m. as she drafted her first legal notice. That was the moment something shifted. I stopped thinking of myself as a victim and started seeing myself as someone who had survived, who had learned something useful. I began writing about my experience more openly. I submitted an article to a financial blog and they published it. The next week, I was invited to speak at a webinar on financial boundaries. My voice shook the first time, but afterward, I got 3 emails from attendees thanking me for saying out loud what they had only dared to think. The more I talked, the less power the shame had. I realized I wasn't alone. I was part of a quiet community that had been taught to put others first, no matter the cost. And now we were learning to choose ourselves. It didn't make the grief disappear. I still had days when I missed the idea of a loving family, when I saw a mother and daughter laughing over brunch and had to look away. But those moments no longer unmade me. They passed, and in their place came something steadier. A kind of peace I hadn't known was possible. I built new friendships, people who respected boundaries, who asked questions instead of making assumptions. I learned how to celebrate myself without shrinking to make others comfortable. My life got quieter, but also more real. Every step forward was mine, and that after everything was enough. Looking back, I don't think I ever understood what boundaries really meant until mine were broken in such a profound way. I used to think setting limits was selfish, that saying no was cold. But I've learned that boundaries are not walls. It's your choice when to open. They are acts of love, not just for yourself, but for the people you allow in. This journey wasn't just about a stolen signature or a lawsuit. It was about reclaiming my identity, my right to choose, my right to exist without being used. I had to unlearn years of conditioning that taught me being a good daughter meant giving more than I had. I had to face the truth that love, when weaponized, isn't love at all. And in that process, I found something deeper than justice. I found clarity. If you've ever been made to feel guilty for protecting your peace or pressured into silence to keep the family image intact, I want you to know you're not alone. You're not dramatic. You're not ungrateful. You are allowed to protect your life, your future, and your name. And you don't owe anyone your silence. This space, this story, is for all of us who are learning how to say no and still believe we're good people. If my story spoke to something in you, I'd love to hear yours. Drop a comment or just let me know what this made you feel. Sometimes healing starts with telling the truth out loud, and sometimes that truth is the first step to something better. Something is finally yours.